It seems like there's a lot of industry conversation now about moving from measuring proxies to measuring outcomes, okay? So first, just a simple yes or no down the line, and then I want to get into it a little bit. But yes or no, the measurement of advertising should be about driving business outcomes and not proxies.
Yes.
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 Yes, all right, that was easy. Now, Scott, let me start with you. When we talked about measurement, you said, measurement is still behind. So what's happening there? We just talked about planning a little bit. So let's kind of finish the story with measurement and how we drive outcomes for the advertiser.
Sure. There's like not a lot of clients believe there's one true God, and that God is Nielsen, and that is wrong. Sorry, if there's Nielsen people here, I'm sorry. I like you. The problem is that, if you're looking at an application and you're an app, you're Pandora, you're whomever, you have to actually install the Nielsen app into your SDK, and there's not a lot of room for that. And so we think that like 40% or so of all video or all content that could be measured is not. And that's a big problem. So there's a problem with planning, there's a problem with delivery, and there's also a huge problem with actually looking at what works and what doesn't work. And the great thing, I think, ultimately about programmatic and looking at how you can start to fuse different panels, be that Polk or IRI or Catalina or whatever, into a DMP is you can actually start to look at the causality of marketing and actually look at the performance based to sales. And that's where we should go.
Okay, and Arun, when we talked about measurement, you said a big part of the conversation with client is what is valued, right? Is outcome value or valued or is cost valued? So can you give us a minute on that?
Well, yeah, it's a conversation where I think over the years, depending on who you are talking to in the client organization, you sort of tend to get a couple of different definitions of what is an outcome. There is the conversation with marketing and the brand where there is a focus either around brand metrics or whether it's a performance metric. And then there seems to be a disconnect in the conversation that you have with procurement, which is about cost. And the expectation is, if you literally look at this, let me think about it like a drop-down. I pick the audience, and then there are these different circles that emerge, which is around price, context, viewability, outcomes. And then depending on the price range, if I reduce the price range, the size of the circles reduces, and there's no overlap in some cases. And that's what leads to the disconnect, which is that there is a desire in one part of the organization to drive towards the outcome, and the other part doesn't necessarily believe that that is measurable or comparable across a wider set of the ecosystem. And I think at the end of the day, you're not going to be spending money on advertising unless you want to drive some kind of outcome. Whether it's in the immediate future or it's in the long-term future, you're looking for an outcome. And at the end of the day, you're getting judged on that basis. So I think there needs to be clarity on what is that outcome. And as far as I'm concerned, we'll get there in terms of solving some of these problems, but there needs to be an alignment on the other side of the marketing organization on what is a common understood definition of value and outcomes that are desired.
Okay, and Brian, we were talking about the same thing, and we were saying measuring apples to apples. You said this is the key to everything, and clients would love to get there, but there are issues with walled gardens and some other things.
I think it's as much an economic problem as it is a technology problem. The technology would be relatively easy to solve. I think it has to do with the fact that the most powerful media companies right now have a better understanding of consumers than many advertisers do, and they want to hold on to that leverage, which means they want to define their own metrics and they want to grade their own homework. And we're left leaning back on Nielsen, which is imperfect at best, and then looking at investment in a very siloed way, right? We know that YouTube has one set of standards, video in a Facebook newsfeed has a different set of standards, and then a linear television feed has a different set of standards. And what I mean by apples to apples is essentially what our clients want is they just want to be able to value all these things consistently, whether that's brand awareness or performance. I think that depends on the advertiser, that depends on the objective of the campaign, and ultimately I agree that everything's driving towards performance, but it also has to do with how far away an advertiser is from the actual transaction. All advertisers are getting closer to the transaction, but some still need to build brand awareness, and what we have to figure out and what we're driving towards is what is a YouTube impression? What's the value of that versus a Facebook newsfeed video versus a linear television impression? And that's what we have to get to.
Yeah, good. Okay. And Doug, we talked about procurement departments, and the issue there is it's about cost, not value. So tell us, what are those discussions like?
Well, I think, it is about what are you valuing as important. And I think, you get what you measure. So if you've got a procurement department, they're looking at how do we extract cost and drive down that cost. Because if I can drive down that cost and buy what I bought before, but buy it more cheaply, then the thesis is that, therefore, the return on investment or the performance will be improved. Now, that assumes that all things are equal and the quality of that inventory or the quality of what you're buying is exactly the same. I think what we'd like to get to is, there is a race to the bottom, and there's it can only be bought so cheaply before you're starting to fundamentally disrupt the quality of that inventory, right? And so what we'd like to do is change the conversation and start to look at the value in. So cost out versus value in. What's the performance of that? It actually may cost you a higher CPM. It may be more expensive media, but if the response from the consumer is greater, right, then the overall value of that media buy is going to be better for that client. And so that's where we have to, and that's why there is this drive for some common measurement across them, because if you can say, I'll pay more for this, but I know that it's going to have 3x the response on it, then that actually is a better investment than saying, let's drive 50% out of the cost and just buy it more cheaply.
Jay, I also think there's an addiction to proxies, which exists because in many cases there are benchmarks that have been available for years, and it makes it easier. And I think people are just a little bit reluctant to go into a new space, which they should. So there is an addiction that we need to get rid of at the same time.